Hello friends, welcome to Tech Granth. So in this video we will talk about a Docker file. So what is a Docker file, how to create a Docker file, and once created how to use it to run any container. So we will see all those things in this video. So let's get started. So before starting, let me just remind you our Docker component architecture, right? Where is Docker file and how it is used, right? So you can be think of yourself as the developer or anyone, right? Which will create a Docker file, right? You can see here, which will we need to create a Docker file. Then what we will do on top of that, that Docker file will be used to create a Docker image, right? Which we will call build. So build an image, Docker image, right? And when we run that image, because then it will become a Docker container because as I said earlier, Docker container is just an running instance of an image, right? And to save that somewhere, right, we can use it multiple times or maybe anywhere, right? So for that purpose we pull or push that Docker image to Docker Hub or registry. So why we use this Docker file and why it is required? So you can see here we have different steps to create and run a containerized application, as we are going to run our application in containerization environment or as a microservice architecture. For that, we have to create and test individual containers, right? Individual containers for each component of our application by first creating Docker images. So what it means, just for an example, you have an application, right, which is having different i- components. Or for just take is you have three components, so you might require three containers, right? For one of the container you would need Docker images, and those Docker images will be created or built by Dockerfile. So the very first step to run Docker or containerized applications, we need Docker images which will be create or built by Dockerfile. Then we have to assemble those containers and supporting infrastructure, the files required, right? Or networking or storage, all those supporting infrastructure into a complete application. And then we can test, share, and deploy our complete containerized application, and we can make it even production use as well. So Dockerfile is just a set of instructions or commands which describe that how to assemble a private file system for a container for isolation, and can also contain some metadata describing how to run a container based on this image. I would say this is the most important part of containerized applications, and so for microservice architecture as well, because everything lies on it, right? Every Docker images are built on Docker files. So usage might be different way in different ways, but this is the main requirement for any container which then used to build or run our applications using Docker images. So we mainly use three commands here: Docker create, right? Docker build or Docker run. Docker create and Docker build will be used separately to create a Docker image only. But we can also use Docker run to do the all the functioning of these commands as well. So we can just run single Docker run command to create, build, and run an Docker image to create a container. So let's see how we use those commands. So first of all, Docker build command. So how we use this, or what is Docker build command? Docker build command is basically have two components. First is Docker file and other is context. Context files means the files which would be required for that image to run or do its functionalities. So this context can be your local path on your system, right? It can be from URL as well, where we can use those URL from Git repositories or prepackaged tarbals. tar files, right? And we can also use plain text files as a URL. You can see if we build with URL, we have these commands docker build and that URL you can give, right? And this is from Git repository. You can see github.com, right? Where root fs will be your Git repository, container will be your commit used, right? And docker will be your context. You can have this on the right top reference, right? If you have name like this my repo.git and my branch colon my folder, so here my repo will be specified repository which we are going to use. My branch will be commit used, right? That can be reference heads, it will be written as reference slash either heads or tags or pools, and then specified whichever we want to use. Then we have build context, which folder we want to use. If we will not define, then it will use a root as the build context folder. So we have that tar.gz we can also specify it, and within that tar file which docker file from which location we want to use, we can also specify that. Then we have direct URL of a remote tarball which will be sent to Docker daemon. Means we can use tarball saved on remote servers as well on another servers. Then we have this build with hyphen or local path. We can give also local path or of our system in this command docker build hyphen, right? And this is std in, right? Standard input will be given as docker file, or we can give also docker build hyphen f, the field that is for file dockerfile dot prod if you want to use docker file with different names or from different files, and this is for current folder. Same docker build we can also have standard input from tar file as well, and we can also build with the tags as the tags are also useful to remember those images and to just categorize those images. So hyphen t will be used for tag, and you can see this is our repository and this is our image name, right? You can see a hyphen t option to tag the image with repository name and tag version, and if you use a hyphen rm equal to false option to keep the intermediate container after the build is complete. We also have one option if we give some directory or some location where we have multiple files including docker file, but we want to ignore those files, some of those files, so we can use dot docker ignore file, right? We can write our file names in this new file dot docker ignore, and we can use that, which will eventually reduce the size of our image. Another, we have docker run command as I told, right? We have multiple options for docker run command. We can use that, and we can even use any image with the tag or digest option, which is a uh, SHA key, right? Algorithm key, which we can also use instead of tags. Then we can give command and arguments, like if you want to run our image in the background, right? So that can be called as a detached mode or a background mode, right? Or I also we have another one foreground, or which is default option, and the output of this that creating or build image or running container will be shown on the terminal. So we can use docker run hyphen d for detached hyphen name. This will be the image name, sorry, container name, right? Top demo will be container name, ubuntu will be the image name, and this is the command which we want to run in that container, right? Usr bin top hyphen b. So this was the in detached mode, but if you want to run that in attached mode or on the terminal, we can use that as well, docker attach and container name, right? So Container identification, you can see for that we can use hyphen name option, right? We have network settings where we have multiple options here, but default will be the bridge network. Restart policies, default is no, right? So it will not restart automatically. We have to specify that option either always or unless stopped or on failure with the maximum retries, that if it fails then how many retries it should try to get it running again. So we can check that option with this command docker inspect hyphen f field and restart count for any container name, and state dot started at when it will start, right? We have runtime constraints on a resource. We can also specify how much CPU and memory we can use, or that container should use. Apart from that, if we have done everything, then we can also clean up with hyphen rm command. You can see docker run hyphen d detach mode hyphen p is port mapping of any specific container or image, right? Like here we are just mapping that port of container port 8080 to the uh, outside port. It's in general which is for web browser, and then we will give image name and container name hyphen g is daemon of. So we will use all these commands, right? In our just when we are going forward. So we have seen two commands, right? A Docker build and Docker run. Then, but for to run those commands, we need a Docker file, right? So we how we can create Docker file? So Docker file instructions, right? As I said, the Docker file is just a set of instructions. So where Docker is just a tool to make the creation, deploy, and running of applications easier by using so-called containers, which allow uh, right, we can ship them as a single package. So we use Dockerfile to create that package, right? Using below instructions. These are the those instructions which are talking about the set of instructions of a Docker file. So we use these commands, or you can say instructions from, right? First is from, which will be used on the top very first one, which means which image we are going to use with any specified tag, right? Or we are using this from scratch. We are building our Docker file. Then we have run instructions where we will pass on commands which should run within that container, right? Then we have work directory. Work dir means working directory, which is to define working directory of Docker container at any given time. It means if you just run in a container, so where it should land you, that will be the your current working directory, whichever you will specify it here. Then we have copy instruction, which copy a folder from our local machine to Docker image. And then we have add instruction, which is similar to copy but with additional functionality of extracting tar file from source directly, and also use URL instead of local file directory. Okay, so two extra features will be there. Extract, it can extract tar files from our source directly, and also we can use URL. Then we have CMD. CMD just for commands, right? We can set default commands, but we can override them by specifying when build container. Means we can give parameters when we'll be running that Docker image to create a container, and that will override these instructions. But instead of that, we can also use, and we have another option, entry point, where which also do the same thing, same functionality as CMD. But here for entry point, we cannot override the entry point instructions from the Docker run command parameters. Then we have env. Env is for environment. So if we want to set environment variables for a Docker container, we can use this env instructions. right? Then we have label. If we want to just labelize our containers, we can set using these label instructions, which will add metadata to an image, which it will be just like a key value pair. We should put that those key value pairs in between quotes, right? Then we have health check. We can also define health check whether our container will be working or alive, or those kind of health checks, right? Which can tell Docker how to test the container, right? How we can test that container is running or it's failing. All those checks we can also define here in our Docker file. Then we have stop signal to kill the Docker container immediately. Okay, usually what happens, if we'll send any command, it will wait for our Docker to stop gracefully. But we can also define that if we send that signal, stop signal or kill signal, just stop or kill the Docker container immediately. Then we have volume instructions to persist our data between containers. Means container is just have ephemeral storage, right? Means till the time container is running, we would be able to store our data or uh, do any storage kind of instructions, or we can use mount points, all those things to store our data. But what if a container restarted or stopped? It means that data which we have stored within that container, that will be lost. So to avoid that, losing our data, we can use volume instructions to persist or permanently store our data. Then we have expose. To specify a container, listen on specific network port at runtime, which is a TCP by default, and we also have a UDP as well, which I showed you in last command, where we specified port docker run hyphen p 8080, right? So that specific that will specify that 80 network port at runtime, means we can connect to that container using that port. So all these are most important instructions we can use in our Docker file to create or build an image, Docker image for any container. So all those instructions are used to create layers for a Docker file or for a container, which means if we run any instruction, it will create a layer, right? And we can skip those layers if we want to just quickly start our container, or right, we can minimize our Docker image regarding to size. So you can see here, if in this I'll show you that when we will create Docker files, but right now we just using four instructions, right? I showed you in last slide: from, copy, run, and command, right? From, I told image, we will use image, right? We have Ubuntu image and its version 18.04. Then copy means we will copy the files or directories from our local system, which is a dot current working directory, to slash app within the container or Docker image. Then we run command with this run, right? Where we will just send this make slash app command. We will build whatever will be in this app directory. We will build that, and then we will run a command python and app.py. App.py will be a script, Python script, which we can run directly from here. So when our container will be started, we will get it by running this Python script. So any Docker image consists of read-only layers, each of which represent a Dockerfile instructions. So whenever we just put instructions, that will be just a read-only layers. The layers are stacked, and each one is a delta of changes from the previous layer, right? So whatever happened from within from to copy, that will be a different layer, right? And on top of that, run will be having a delta of the changes from previous layer, right? So when we run an image and generate a container, we add a new writable layer and container layer, right, on top of those underlying layers. All changes made to the running container, such as writing new files, right, modify existing files, or deleting, even deleting files, are written to this thin writable container layer. So you can see this will be the read-only container layer, and these will be the writable container layer. So only the instruction, you can see notes here, only the instruction means run, copy and add. These instructions only will create layers, right? Current working directory is called a build context, from where we run our context files, right? I showed you in Dockerfile. And the smallest image will be the alpine image, which is tightly controlled, and that can be have size less than 5 MB. After being a full Linux distribution, means we can install a full Linux distribution within just that 5 MB image. So these are some basic about Dockerfile and Dockerfile layers and Dockerfile instructions, set of instructions, right? So to avoid this video to be so long, I am just wrapping up here, and we will continue in our next video. We will see all these instructions, how they will work in our Docker file, right? So uh, that's all for this session, and we will see further working of these instructions in our next video. I hope this video will be a little helpful to you to know the about of Dockerfile, right? So keep watching, keep sharing. Thank you, and see you in next video. Bye.